Okay, thank you. I am so happy to be here, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to meet you all virtually. I'm going to be speaking on the integration of Tibetan and functional medicines with applications to nervous system disorders. And this is in collaboration with Dr. Lobsang Dondup, who's a doctor of traditional Tibetan medicine. And he presented at the in-person version of the meeting in Tokyo. And this is also in collaboration with Dr. Amy Banter, a holistic family medicine practitioner who is also a professor of medicine for nearly 10 years. And the three of us have been collaborating for the last 24 years. So I'm going to be sharing on our integrative work. And then most recently, we began collaborating with Garrett Tubman, a doctor of physical therapy, and I'll present a slide at the end on his offerings. So Tibetan medicine is an ancient mind-body medicine with a focus on lifestyle, prevention, and nature. Modern Tibetan medicine is a blend of indigenous Tibetan shamanistic bone medicine and Ayurvedic medicines, along with elements from Chinese, Persian, and Galenic medical influences, but mostly the two, the bone and Ayurveda. Our approach is to add a modern iteration of integration with the addition of functional medicine, which is a modern systems biology medicine. Tibetan medicine has philosophical links with Buddhism and the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space, and the 3 nipa, or humors, or functional energies, and the 3 mental poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. So I'm going to be reviewing both the functional and Tibetan medical descriptions of nervous system disorders, their diagnosis and treatment. And I have a lot of slides with detail that I may not necessarily have time to review, but I put the information there just to make you aware that we do have several publications on this work and one in preparation that we'll be submitting next month. And my contact is at the end if anyone would like to get copies of these papers. We have helped those with MS and ALS go into remission and presented that work in 2017 at a meeting at Harvard Medical School. And those talks are available online on YouTube. So from the Tibetan medical point of view, for any disease with a clinical pathological nature, there's an imbalance of the 3 nipa, or 3 humors. In Tibetan, they're referred to as lung, tripa, and bagan, or wind, bile, and phlegm, and then chusur and srin. And chusur is translated as yellow water, and it comprises the body's fluids, the lymph fluid, blood plasma, interstitial fluid, intra and extracellular fluid, cerebral spinal fluid, and relates to the spread of disease through the body. And we believe that chusur is very similar to the interstitium, or akin to fascia, that was recently described by Neil Thies. The literal translation of srin is bugs. The modern description is microorganisms. And in Tibetan medicine, there's a description of 84,000 microorganisms and 84,000 mental afflictions, providing an ancient description of the mind-body connection for over 1,500 years, and that healing begins in the gut. And based on shape, spiral organisms are of a wind nature, such as Lyme, syphilis, cholera, H. pylori. Rod-shaped organisms are of a bile nature, and round-shaped organisms are of a phlegm nature. There's an 8-part clinical science of Tibetan medicine: physiology and pathology of the body, pediatrics, gynecology, nervous system disorders, which I will review today, wounds and trauma, toxicology, longevity, and infertility and aphrodisiacs. But they all overlap, and I'll be sharing how we're using the longevity protocols for helping to restore balance in nervous system disorders. So the acute causes of nervous system disorders include insect bites, poisons, toxins, infections, and physical trauma. And we've also seen that in functional medicine. The chronic causes depend on the location of the damage, whether it's a limbs, abdomen, or head. And I'm going to compare and contrast multiple sclerosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. For all nervous system disorders, and in general for all imbalance, lung excess and Bakken deficiency coexist. So wind excess and phlegm deficiency. Lung deficiency and Bakken excess coexist, or wind deficiency, phlegm excess. And then there can be a tripa excess or excess fire, a hot condition, and tripa deficiency or a cold condition. So the Tibetan diagnosis of nervous system disorders includes visualization, palpation, and interrogation. And under the category of visualization, Tibetan medicine has a very unique urine analysis. It's unique to its tradition, where the first morning urine is evaluated for its color, odor, sediment, size of bubbles when stirring, and the rate of dissolution. So with the lung excess and Bakken deficiency, the urine's a bluish white in color, no sediment or odor, and big bubbles that disappear quickly, similarly to the properties of wind, or the lung excess. Lung deficiency and Bakken excess, the urine is pale and white with no sediment or odor, small bubbles that are slow to disappear, similar to excess phlegm. And for tripa excess or excess fire, the urine's pale yellow or possibly darker in color with a strong odor and sediments, small bubbles that disappear quickly. The odor and sediments reflect albumin in the urine and fire or inflammation. And with a tripa deficiency, the urine's white with big and stable bubbles that do not disappear, reflecting a cold condition. And then for palpation, the Tibetan physician palpates the radial pulse with the opposite hand of the patient at 3 locations and 2 depths to monitor the body. And this is a very subtle energetic reading of the transmission of the system and organ information through the body. And the pulse is evaluated for its frequency, amplitude, and tension as relates to the 3 nipa and combinations of these. So again, for lung excess and Bakken deficiency, wind excess, phlegm deficiency, the pulse is rapid, superficial, with no pressure underneath, weak, slow, and sinking. For lung deficiency and Bakken excess, the pulse is slow and thick, not superficial, but under the muscle. For tripa excess or fire, the pulse is rapid and tight, both superficially and deep. And for tripa deficiency, it's slow and sinking, both superficially and deep. So the overall 3 human characteristics of nervous system disorders that we've identified, for multiple sclerosis in general, it's a lung disorder, a wind disorder, reflecting the ongoing fluctuations and changes in multiple sclerosis. However, when MS becomes a chronic condition, it's a Bakken disorder, and during an acute exacerbation, it's a tripa disorder. And we found that in women with MS, there are primarily hormone and kidney imbalances, whereas in men with MS, it's toxins and stress are the contributors, which may explain why MS tends to be more aggressive in men. And we have published on this work back in 2009 through 11. With amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, we define it as a Bakken disorder due to the limpness, weakness, and loss of muscle function in people with ALS. And in Parkinson's disease, we define it as a lung disorder due to the uncontrolled movement and anxiety that coexists with Parkinson's. So in Dr. Lobsang's talk on the in-person version, he compared the ancient and modern medical trees. This is for Tibetan medicine and functional medicine. And in our integrative work, we're integrating them both and referring to it as functional Tibetan medicine. But in both medicines, we seek to get to the root cause of signs and symptoms, whereas in contemporary biomedicine, someone will have signs and symptoms, an organ system diagnosis, and sent to a specialist with a treatment for the signs and symptoms. In functional medicine and Tibetan medicine, we seek to get to the root cause, and it's essentially what do you need to get or remove from your body, whether it's environmental pollutants, the microorganisms, trauma, emotional and physical, relationships and networks, stress and resilience, nutrition and hydration, exercise, movement, and sleep and relaxation. If any of these are out of balance, it can trigger our genetic predisposition, but in general, our DNA is not our destiny. And then the body is simplified into functional systems rather than organ systems, and they all crosstalk. But in general, for both functional and Tibetan medicine, healing begins in the gut. And so, our treatment approaches for nervous system disorders follow the Tibetan longevity protocols for regeneration. And again, we've also published on this in 2009, but that protocol is first tonification of the body, then detoxification, and then rejuvenation. And the sequence is important. And then we implement a modern generation of laboratories based in functional medicine for each of these processes. So for tonification, first evaluate the DNA to see where someone could potentially be going out of balance if triggered, and balance the gut microbiome, implement dietary modifications, and balance biochemistry, including hormones, nutrient deficiencies, cardiovascular system, and immunity. And then we utilize Tibetan herb and herb mineral formulas and tinctures to help tonify and possibly nutrient, supplements as needed. Then we detoxify, because if your body's not tonified or in balance first and you try to detoxify, then it's kind of like adding more wind to the fire, and it can cause more harm. And this includes the removal of heavy metals, organic solvents and pesticides, and our microorganisms. And again, we primarily use Tibetan herb and herb mineral formulas and tinctures, and I will be sharing these formulas later in the talk. And sometimes we use supplements. And then for rejuvenation, we use the potential use of Tibetan herb mineral precious pills, nectars, herbal baths, medicated oils and massage, moxibustion, Tibetan yogic practices, and the Nubi direct current device. So now I'm going to quickly review how we integrate that with the functional labs, and I'm going to be showing you labs for each of these areas. In addition to my work as a clinician, I have a doctorate in physical chemistry and have spent the majority of my career in the university developing new methods for evaluating the nervous system. And, I have methods in physics and bioengineering. So as I've worked in functional medicine, I've taken this background with an interest in laboratory development, and I've, for example, looked at many genomic tests or many microbiome tests or hormones. So I'm showing you examples of these today, but I invite you to see the labs through the lens of the longevity protocols of tonification, detoxification, and rejuvenation. And I've utilized those Tibetan protocols to determine when to do the labs. But in general, I begin with DNA. And I like this particular report because it's organized by pathways and it's color-coded. So it's very easy for me to, kind of interpret the data. And it organizes, and each of these pathways are many genes, and there's a computer algorithm that assigns it a score. Like if it's very high, it could have a very high impact if the genes are triggered. But the data is ordered by the cellular, system, and cardiovascular levels, and also energy as relates to weight loss and weight gain, resistance, activity and exercise, and some nutrients. And then I'll look at the microbiome, and I've used many microbiome tests, but this is one that looks at the whole genome analysis of the microbes in the gut, including the keystone species and potential pathogens. But this one also has a functional microbiome analysis. Those microbes in our gut are making vitamins and neurotransmitters. And this is showing some part of that test. It's much more extensive in this, but how are you recycling hormones in the gut, especially as relates to like women with MS, as I mentioned earlier, or making your neurotransmitters or your glutathione. But I also look at markers of intestinal health to make sure the upper digestion is working well, the pancreas and pancreatic enzymes. Are you moving things through the liver well? Is there inflammation in the gut? And how's the intestinal permeability? And there are many labs that look at this, and some in even more detail. And then I also start with hormone testing, especially of the adrenals and the diurnal cortisol and the DHEA. because as in this report, you can see this, you want your value to be in between these two lines, and this person's very depleted. So if you don't have any adrenal reserves, you need to support that so that you can heal. Also in this report, I like to begin here to see how you're metabolizing, especially the estrone through the liver, because if you're not metabolizing these well through the liver and they get high, it can bind to DNA and damage it. And I've had many people come to me with a diagnosis of cancer, and this is going on, this is too high. And so I've learned that it's really important to first support the gut and liver before we start adding more herbs or supplements. And then once that's done, I'll look at the nutrients. And again, I like this report because it's correlated with those pathways that I saw in genetics. And, with these complex neurological disorders, there's an immune dysfunction. And so I'll often look at the subcategories of lymphocytes, the T cells, B cells, natural killer cells. And this particular report then will identify what they call immunophenotypes that will define, is this immune imbalance due to gut dysbiosis, toxins, hidden infections, or a combination of both? And so then that's a way for me to dive in deeper on subsequent testing. Also, people with neurological disorders. Oh, darn it, hold on. Will have, mood imbalances, anxiety or depression, and we can look at neurotransmitters. And then also this particular work overlaps with my basic research of myelin lipids. And it's looking in the living person of all the lipids that are the building blocks for nervous system structure and function. And our nervous system is primarily composed of lipids. And if you don't have enough of the building blocks, such as here, then how can you regenerate? And then finally, I look at cardiovascular inflammation, especially homocysteine and lipoprotein A, which are genetic vascular inflammation. And we find this to be in balance a lot in nervous system disorders. And then you don't have enough, blood flow and nourishment to support the nerves. And again, this is an approach I learned through Tibetan medicine. So the generalized three humor treatment approach with Tibetan medicine, if it's a tripa or bile humor imbalance, you begin with diet, gentle exercise, and meditation. If it's a bodkin or phlegm imbalance, diet, more vigorous exercise and meditation. If it's a lung imbalance, such as with nervous system disorders, diet, gentle exercise, herbs, accessory treatments, and meditation. And I'll just quickly show you here that we use the properties of the 6 tastes and the hot and cold potencies to help balance both symptoms and the microbiome. And this applies to both foods and herbs. The 6 tastes are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, pungent. And each taste is a combination of 2 of the 5 elements. And the taste combined with its quality are used to balance the 3 humors. But more important and more powerful for clinical applications are the concept of post-digestion taste. So as we go through digestion, sour will transform into sour, sweet and salty transform into sweet, bitter, astringent, and pungent transform into bitter. And sour increases tripa or fire, bitter increases lung or wind, and sweet increases bakkan or phlegm. And interestingly, sour, sweet, and bitter receptors have recently been identified in the human body and could relate to these post-digestion tastes and help fine-tune nutrition as medicine in the future. So in the next 2 slides, I'm going to show 12 formulas that we've had identified and have been having benefit for these nervous system disorders, including for MS, ALS, and Parkinson's. And on the first 7 here, they're herb formulas. And we use them depending on, the imbalance of their humors. So some are for phlegm conditions and to move blood and hormones. Some are for wind heat conditions and all neurological conditions. Some are for wind, but not wind heat, especially for anxiety. This is wind, not wind heat, but less for anxiety, and wind heat with oxidative stress, and especially hormones, menopause. So these numbers refer to the number of ingredients in the formulas. Here's one for the bile or heat condition, and then one to promote circulation. And then these 5 are herb mineral pills, referred to as rinchen pills, or some translated as precious pills. So these first 2, there's rinchen Jumar 25 and 70, the precious coral pill, coral calcium, a gentle form and a stronger form for nervous system disorders. Rinchen Mutig is especially used for inflammation, brain inflammation, nervous system inflammation. Rinchen Ratnasampal, or the precious wish-fulfilling jewel pill, is for nervous system regeneration, also an antidote for poisoning, and it has kind of the combinations of Jumar and Mutig in the formula. And then Rinchen Dongjor is the most potent of the precious pills, and we especially use it for removing toxins and poisons of all sorts, including heavy metals, chemicals, insect bites, cancer, infections. And I want to add here that all of these are very potent medications and must be, taken under the guidance of a Tibetan physician, because if they're given at the wrong time, it can affect your state of hydration and dehydration due to the minerals. And in general, on the days that we give these medications, the client does not take other herbs. And our approach in general is less is more. Like when we use the herbal medicines, we'll use one formula in the morning and one in the evening. And sometimes, depending on the state of the client, we may mix those with some supplements they need to support their gut. But our approach is less is more, and this has been very helpful. And then here shows the Newbie direct current device. It's this machine here with these 4 leads coming out that attach to electrodes. And it has a direct current with a carrier waveform as opposed to an alternating current, such as in a TENS unit. And that direct current imitates action potentials of the peripheral nervous system, so we can comfortably, achieve more power, delivering intensity to the muscle fibers and the sensory afferent pathways to accelerate the body's tissue healing abilities. In our experience, that it lessens pain and spasticity and promotes muscle strength and function in those with MS and ALS, and decreases pain in Parkinson's disease. And I've seen in a client who was unable to move her hand that after her first treatment, she was moving the hand and it persisted and then improved over time. There have been considerable studies at the cellular level on the mechanism of action of direct current, and that includes effects on the mitochondria and nitric oxide, among others. So in summary, although the initial symptoms, location of nervous system disruption, and the progression of illness differ for those with MS, ALS, and Parkinson's disease, our interventions overlap based on one's individualized symptoms, their 3 NEPA constitution, and hot or cold conditions to restore balance. And it is our hope that this summary will encourage further studies in the roles of the mind and the 3 mental poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance, Chusser, or the yellow water, as relates to the interstitium and spread of disease, the post-digestion taste and the microbiome and disease, environmental toxins, gender differences, and case studies to better understand and treat nervous system disorders with functional Tibetan medicine. And I'd like to summarize with this translation of the 4 immeasurables that are integral to both Tibetan Buddhism and medicine. May all beings have happiness and the true cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the true cause of suffering. May all beings never be parted from the happiness that is without suffering. And may all beings abide in peace and equanimity, their minds free from the 3 mental poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. And I'd like to acknowledge an anonymous donor who's generously supported this work for the past 4 years. And this is my email, Cynthia Husted @me.com. If anyone would like to correspond or receive copies of our previous 4 publications, and we have one in preparation on this clinical work that will be submitted next month. Thank you.